and welcome to Prime Talk. So today we have the pleasure of chatting with one of our dear friends, Frank Baylis, who is a businessman, a philanthropist, former politician, and now looking to be the next leader of the Liberal Party of Canada and, of course, Prime Minister of the country. Frank, for those of you who are not as familiar with his background, is executive chairman of Baylis Medical Technologies, a medical device company focused on areas of interventional radiology and neurology. And from 2015 to 2019, Frank was a member of parliament for the federal riding of Pierre-Font-Villard. And Frank is also, again, what has been over the last number of years, the president of Baylis Medical Company from 1989 to 2015. During this period, the company grew into a world leader in the areas of interventional cardiology and pain management, and Baylis Medical was subsequently sold to Boston Scientific in 2022 for $1.7 billion. Frank, congratulations. Tremendous outcome. For his business and communal achievements, Frank has been the recipient of numerous awards and a successful entrepreneur in other fields. He's the co-founder of Walk of Fame Entertainment, a film production company. He's also written and produced several feature films, including Transit, Generation Wolf, and Undocumented. Frank, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Really great to be here with you, Mo. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So let's start a little bit with your personal story. So you built this successful technology business and then you stepped into politics. Was there like a specific moment that made you say, I got to do this. This is what I am. This is who I am. This is my calling. What drove you to do that?
So first of all, we were doing great. And when I told my partner, Chris, I'm going into politics, he was not happy with me, not happy at all. But these things are a calling. I think in life, you have a calling, something that speaks to you and something that you want to do. And that really spoke to me. And I thought that it's my opportunity to give back. I could say that.
And so, okay, so you leave the brutal world of business and you enter the perhaps even more brutal world of politics. What lessons are you taking from kind of your entrepreneurial successes to then hopefully transfer into your political successes?
I'd say that what happens when you're a businessman and you move into the political world, generally speaking, they're very frustrated people because things aren't getting done. And you're going around in a circle. It doesn't be that way. I know people, and they ultimately pulled out. They even didn't finish their terms just because they were so frustrated. What I took away from that is that I'm an entrepreneur, so I took away, wow, there's great opportunity to run this place an awful lot better. That's how I looked at it. I said, we can do just a heck of a lot better.
Yeah. The one thing that I think has been challenging is that we have seen success being criminalized, so to speak, and there's certainly those on the left flanks of our country that would see success with a great deal of skepticism, basically saying, well, we can't trust rich people because how could a rich person run this country? How do you think about that? How do you view that? How do you respond to people when you get some of that feedback?
I give the example of China. About 60, 70 years ago, Chinese were all poor together. It's communists, and what that meant is we're all poor together. And you know what? There was a time they could hardly afford to send a delegation to New York because they couldn't pay the hotel fees. They didn't have enough money to pay the hotel fees. People forget that. That's 70 years ago. Now, China today has approximately 750 billionaires. But you know what else they have? 750 million middle-class people. So you got 750 million class people, and then people are fixated, oh, well, there's these 750 billionaires, and they've mixed it up. Not at all. What happens in human nature, like everything, there's the bell curve. And you want that bell curve. And when you have the bell curve, there's people that are going to be at the front of the line. There's people going to be at the bottom. Those are the extreme edges. And what happens in politics is people get around saying, look, if it wasn't for this little handful of people at the, at the far end of the bell curve, everything would be great. But that's the opposite. Look at China. China said 750 billionaires, 750 million middle class. That's your example right there. That's a real world example. So I often find that people focusing on the billionaires got it all wrong. And I tell you something else. If we found a billionaire and, the far left says, get this guy, get all his money. Forget about taxing him more. Take every penny and you spread it around to Canadians. You know how much money that gives you? Each Canadian gets about $25.
Wow.
Okay, that's going to help you. That's going to help you buy a house. So let's say we get all the billionaires and we take all their money. They get one-time payment of $10,000, not every year, one time. That helps you buy a house. So I think that there's a misleading people, and it's easy always to find someone to blame, and that whether it's this person or that group of people or that religion. So this idea that billionaires are somehow to blame is a nonsensical one, and I'm calling that out.
Yeah, no, and I obviously agree with that. And I think that it's not even whether it's billionaires or not, like the entrepreneurs in this country are the ones who are infusing this creative energy that's building productivity, that's enhancing lives for everyone else. I think that's a really important message that unfortunately doesn't get enough airtime. One of the things, I mean, you mentioned China, and maybe that's a interesting segue to kind of what's going on in the geopolitical realm today. And again, whether we're looking from geopolitics or the economic frontier. I mean, there's a lot of volatility out there. What are some of your top geopolitical policies, and how might some of those differ from the platforms of your opponents?
That's a very good question, Mo. What we're seeing, and it saddens me. First of all, I should say I want a great America. I think the world is better off when America is wealthy, strong, and highly democratic. And they have a huge role to play in the world by performing and pushing out those democratic values into the world. What we're seeing now, sadly, is a pulling back, a building a wall, an exit, this kind of thing. And for me, that's not a great nation. And every time they pull back, guess who shows up? Guess who fills that void? China. So in my worldview, I'd like to see a wealthier, stronger, more powerful United States, but taking the lead in geopolitical matters like they used to do. So I don't want to see an isolation, and America, and I don't want to see a poor America. That might sound like I'm a huge Trump fan. Not at all. I think that he's actually taking them backwards. He's taking them to hide away. And it's a mindset. If you want to be great, you go into the world. You don't build walls. You don't exit. You go forward. And sadly, I'm seeing China do that, and not United States.
And so, sitting from where we are in Canada, how would you, and keeping Canada's economic interests in mind, how would you manage some of the current cross-border tensions that are weaving into the dialogue and obviously the media and ultimately in some policy?
Yeah, Mo, what's happened is our leadership has done everything wrong. I'm sorry to say that, but they've done wrong from the start dealing with Mr. Trump. First thing is this: anybody that's ever successfully dealt with a bully knows you don't give an inch, because you give an inch, they're taking a yard. You give a yard, they're taking a mile. So right at the beginning, our prime minister should never have flown down to meet a private citizen, which is what Mr. Trump is till he becomes president, in his residence. And after that, he did not become more accommodating. He started denigrating our country and our prime minister more, because that emboldened him. That's the first thing to understand. You'd never do that. Second thing is, what we're doing right now is in negotiations is called bidding against yourself. So Mr. Trump, all he does is send out one tweet: I threaten you with this. And we say, okay, we'll do this for you. Not enough? Okay, how about this too? Okay, not enough? So if he wants to talk about the border, I'd say absolutely. We have issues on the border too. We don't like your illegal guns coming up. We don't like your illegal immigrants like we had at Roxham Road coming into Canada. So I'd be happy to talk about the border or other issues. I think that's totally reasonable. But I would not do it under the threat of 25% tariffication. I would call that bluff. What I would do is this: say, no, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. That's great.
So knowing that almost 50% of our exports are energy-based, I would say to Mr. Trump, put your 25% on everything. I already know he can't do it for starters. So I know it's a bluff, because he says he's going to do 25% to Canada, Mexico, and 10% to China all at the same time. Just the threat of that. We saw the U.S. stock market already starting to pull down, because everybody knows this will crash the U.S. stock market. It'll bring tremendous inflation to the American economy, and it'll grind a lot of their factories to a halt, because a lot of them work on what we call just in time. And this is a fully integrated agreement we have between Canada, United States, and Mexico. So I know it's bluffing. Now, people say, oh, Frank, what if he did it? I would say to him, you want to put on, I would say for our energy, put on 100%. What do I care? You put on 100% of electricity. He goes, well, you want to go charge the Americans double for their electricity? Go ahead. What? And he goes, no, you're going to pay for it. I'll say, you send me the bill and I'm not paying for it. Okay, you know what I'm going to do? He'll say, then I'll cut off the electricity. I'll say, cut it off. We are far not understanding that this is not a negotiation. This is a shakedown. And we have an agreement. So a lot of my colleagues who are also running for leadership say, well, I can negotiate better. I can negotiate better. I would say to them, listen, you don't need to. He negotiated that agreement. He signed it, and he says he's not going to respect it. So you can negotiate NAFTA 3.0 or CUSMA 2.0, whatever you want to call it, and he won't respect that one either. So I understand people are worried. I don't want to dismiss their concerns in that, but this is a shakedown. We have to draw a line, and we have to call out his bluff. And I would say something else, Mo, if you'll permit me. I wrote a letter that I had published the day before his inauguration, not the day after. And in it, I said, there's no 25% coming, but I said the first thing he's going to attack is steel. I was wrong with steel and aluminum, but I could predict where he's going and why he's going there. And so I have a plan that would protect the industries he's attacking, protect those jobs, protect the people that are under threat, counterattack with our own tariffs, and both of us lose by that. I don't think anybody thinks we win. And then wait it out. And then let him know what any bully understands is that you better look for a victim somewhere else, because we're not going to be your victim. And I'm not going to be trying to negotiate against myself on anything. I would also work in conjunction with our premiers and tell them, he snaps his finger. You don't fly down there, and you didn't get to meet the president. You didn't get to meet the vice president. You didn't even meet the Secretary of State. They charges you money, put you in a room, you meet some low life, and then low level, I don't know who this person was, and then they send you home. And Trump has snapped his fingers, and our premiers went running. So we need a backbone to get our back up. I understand people are nervous and afraid, but we cannot go 4 years with every time he gives a tweet out that we go running for the hills and give him anything he wants. That has to stop. So we might as well stop it right now.
And that makes abundant sense. And is there a domain in which Trump is right where you actually agree with him? That's number one. And number two, is there an opportunity here for us? Like, everybody's talking about the risk side of this equation. Is there a wake-up call that we in Canada need, and vis-a-vis our policies, our industries, our competitiveness, our productivity? Like, how do you view the opportunity in all this, not just the challenge?
Yeah, okay, I love that, because there's an old saying, you never let a good crisis go to waste. So, for example, one of the things I proposed is that we need to definitely diversify. If that wasn't clear before, it should be pretty clear now. And one of the things we can diversify on is liquid natural gas. So I proposed a plan to build not one, but 2 pipelines, one to go to the east to bring liquid natural gas to the European market, and one to go to the west to bring it to the Asian market. Both of those markets have made it very clear that they'd like our liquid natural gas. And not only that, it will help the economy. It allows us to diversify, and also it helps the environment, because they're burning coal now and they can move to a much cleaner fuel. Now, environmentalists say it's not perfect. Of course it's not perfect, but it's much, much better. And I'm pragmatist. So I would use this opportunity to get our natural resources going somewhere else. And that's something I've announced. And not only did I announce it, but I said the federal government will take care of getting the corridors approved. That means we'd work with the indigenous communities, we'd work with the provinces, and we would get the corridor approved so businesses could have clarity on what's involved. And then they could bid on building the pipeline, knowing that there's not going to be any bait and switch in terms of rules or regulations, and they could build them. And this allows us to diversify. It's not going to happen overnight, but that's one that could really have a good impact. I have other ideas as well in that one.
Yeah, just thinking about executing on that. And won't that need pretty significant interprovincial cooperation? And is that feasible today in the current construct?
I think that crisis that we have now, people have woken up. I think that you have to say, to get to the west, you just have to get BC and Alberta to agree. And I think Alberta wants to do this, and we want this as a country. And I think getting it to the east, you really just have to get Quebec to come on board. It's not that hard. And I think Quebecers are willing to come on board. I think we've not had an honest conversation with them, and I'll have it. And I'll say, look, this is a good thing for you. It's a good thing for a country or for Canada. There's wealth to be created here. And there's also to help the environment. So I don't really see this as hard or as possible as people make it out to be. I actually think it's quite doable. We need to get on.
Yeah. And I mean, I think, listen, the underlying point here is that as government, whether federal, provincial, we need to be more thoughtful, more effective, more efficient in how we operate. I mean, you've actually emphasized for the need for modernizing government operations for a while. What specific reforms would you be looking to implement to do that, to both from an efficiency and transparency point of view? And also, how might that directly benefit the end citizen or the private sector?
So when I was elected, I saw right away, my gosh, look inefficient we're run from every aspect, the legislature and the bureaucracy. And I'm not blaming people. I'm not coming here saying they're bad people or that, but systems get rigged, knotted up within themselves, and they need someone to come and cut that knot open and get things running again. I proposed motion 231. I said to myself, we can do a lot better at the legislature. Just start with that. And I was going to make a number of changes that were going to make us far more effective and efficient, just the way we run the legislature. What happened was I found out pretty quickly that the powers that be don't want these changes. The system works for them. It's not working for me. It's not working for Canadians, but they like that. Now, what I was doing was taking power from the Prime Minister, giving it back to the Speaker of the House, taking it from the Prime Minister, giving it to the members of Parliament, taking it from the Prime Minister or the party leaders, giving it back to the citizens. I was going to build something called a dual chamber. They have this for 35 years in Australia, 30 years in the UK, where it's like a 2-lane highway instead of a 1-lane. Makes a lot more sense. We could be more productive in just the legislature. And if we're always talking about, let's be more productive, let's say, okay, well, why don't we start with ourselves? And that's how I've made my living. And then with respect to the bureaucracy, when I become Prime Minister, I'll have every minister do a deep dive to say, can we implement new processes and where can we implement new technology to make our bureaucrats much more effective? And then we all win. If I can give every business back 2% of their time that they waste dealing with the federal government, well, that's 2% that's going to hit the GDP. It's going to grow it. So
For sure.
I think we should just do that. And I have to give this example, if you permit me.
Yeah, please. You're the engineer. I'm just the interviewer.
I'm an engineer by training, and I can't help myself. So I'm walking along, I look on the ground, I see something broken, and my brain starts going click, click, click. I can fix it like this. I can do this. I can make it better. The career politician sees the exact same thing. And the first thing they say is, wait, don't touch it. Who can I blame? How can I get a couple more votes out of this? What can I do about it to make me get reelected again? And I'm like, can I just fix it? Don't touch it. So that's where I'm coming from. And I see that opportunity. So you can look at it as good or bad, but I see huge opportunities right across the swath of what we do in government. So I'm excited about that, to be honest.
Could you maybe just provide actually a specific example of perhaps an emerging technology that you would potentially integrate into a government process to ultimately either enhance delivery or policymaking or anything?
The biggest pain point that Canadians have with the federal government is Revenue Canada, by far. Individuals and businesses. Now, listen, the person that's calling Revenue Canada trying to get an answer is not the thief. The guy that's stealing money is not calling, hey, listen, Revenue Canada, I got a question for you because I'm planning to steal and not pay my taxes. So can you guide me how not to do it?
Right.
People that are calling you and trying to get answers, and any one of you that are listening, I don't have to ask you. I know if you tried to get an answer out of Revenue Canada, how painful it's been. So it doesn't need to be that way. Why don't we just have it that you can go and book a time, get a Zoom call, and get your question answered? It doesn't seem that hard to me. And then we start to say, treat the people that are trying to get answers, make their life easier. But instead, everybody's treated like, oh, you might be a criminal or this or that, and it's mucked up and gummed up. So that's a great example of how I can help all small businesses, medium-sized businesses, and large businesses, and individuals. It's a big pain point. And what tends to happen is that it's an afterthought. Revenue Canada, it's an afterthought. And then what they do is they say, we got to put in a bunch more auditors because we're sure that everybody's out there stealing, which is like spending all their money chasing 5% instead of helping the 95% do better. So that's just one example of many things I see.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great example. I'm thinking specifically to your career, and I'm thinking about some of the other pain points that Canadians experience at a national level. And obviously, given your personal commitment to improving healthcare, improving access to healthcare, making it affordable, what innovative solutions might you propose for addressing the rising costs of healthcare in Canada, which is just becoming absurd and then obviously inaccessible as wait times and access to experts sort of becomes more and more challenging?
So I tell people, and they kind of look at me twice when I say this, but I tell people we can have and we will have the best healthcare system in the world. We can do it. Now, the challenge we have right now, it's not money. Yes, it's costing more and more, and we're wasting more and more money. And everybody knows this. A couple of years ago, the federal government said we're going to put $40 billion more into healthcare. I don't know anybody that said, "Oh, thank God it's solved." We all went, "Great. There's 40 billion more down, being burnt up." So we all know it's not a money problem. What the challenge is that the healthcare system was built in the 1960s for acute care. But today we're using it for chronic care. So we need a new tool, but we're stuck using the old system for treating a new paradigm. Now, we just need to accept that. So today, there's only two ways to access the system. Either you're lucky and you have a family doctor and you can get to see that family doctor. And if not, what do they all tell you to do? Go to the emergency room. That's the only two ways. And so we go to the emergency rooms and it's over flooded with people and they have to wait hours. Everybody has their own horror story. I don't have to get into that. And so then they say, let's just build bigger emergency rooms. And I say, no, let's not. Let's start using the emergency rooms for what they were designed for. So I want to open more doors into the system. And there's many doors to open. I'll tell you one. First of all, pharmacists. And pharmacists across the country have limited scope of practice, which means they're trained to do a lot, but they're only allowed to do a little. So if we let the pharmacists do what they're trained for, that opens up a whole door. So you've got a common cold or some minor ailment, just go to your local pharmacist. They'll diagnose you. They'll give you a prescription and you're on your way again. Think about that. That's one door. Second door I want to build is what I call a continuous care center. And this will be staffed predominantly by nurse practitioners. Nurse practitioners are much higher trained than a nurse, but not quite to the level of a doctor, but they're very capable and they can diagnose and prescribe and treat. Now, we have approximately 6 million Canadians that have no primary caregiver. So an average doctor does a roster of about 1,500, but let's say we get a nurse practitioner that can do just 1,000 patients. So they're not rushed. They're not under pressure. We need 6,000 nurse practitioners additionally to be trained. Today, we have 450,000 nurses in Canada. So can we take the initiative to train 6,000 of them and put them in their own box, whatever you want to call it, and let people call in, book an appointment, go and see them? It's not an emergency. It's a chronic disease. They get to know you, whatever. And we just use them. And there'll be doctors in there to help out if they have questions. But we can do this. It'll take 4 or 5 years to get them trained up. But they won't cost as much as a doctor. They don't want to be in private practice. They'll be under the government's programs and that. They'll be paid as a salaried employee. And they'll have some place to work. And then we can just alleviate that way. So that's another door. And the last door is also home care. We have all these technologies to keep people in their homes longer. So we need to say, okay, it's a different system now. Instead of using the same old system to try and crush it through and be very frustrated. So we can have much, much better care, much cheaper, I might add.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you see any element of the private system having a role in Canada? Any analog to what's going on in the US? Like, is there any benefit to that taking up some slack?
We actually have a huge private. It's funny how people look at the system because we forget that it was created in the 60s when every doctor was private. And today, the primary doorway to come into the system is a private caregiver. It's a doctor and they are private business. So we already have that. So what we need to do is maintain public payer system, but I'm not so caught up in who controls if it's a private company or public company that's delivering the service. It's much more about the public person taking care of it. So people are not exposed to being like, if you don't have money, you can't get the proper care. So I'm a believer in our existing system, but I'm not worried about how it's delivered. And there's times for public, there's times for private.
Yeah. And Frank, I mean, you've always been somebody, and I've known you for a number of years. You've always been thoughtful about making sure nobody's left out. And I know things like diversity is something that's very close to your heart, making sure, again, that level of inclusiveness. As you look south of the border and you see many DEI initiatives being rolled back, how do you view that? Do you view similar moves in Canada?
So a little bit of my background, Mo, people don't know this as much, but I'm a mixed race person. My mother's a colored lady from Barbados and my dad is a white man from the UK. But when my mother was here in the 60s, she's a nurse. She experienced racial discrimination in employment. But my mother was a fighter. She took that company to court, took 12 years for them to be fined ultimately $25. But she set the precedent case in Canada that said you cannot discriminate based on race. I'm very proud of my mother, and that's something we're inculcated with our values from our parents. And that value is very strong to me. Now, my mother was a young Black woman. She never said you need to give me the job because I'm a young Black woman. She said you cannot deny me the job because I'm a young Black woman. It sounds similar, but
Big
there's
difference.
a difference. So for me, what I want to see with DEI work is to say, okay, if there's barriers, and let's be clear, there are barriers, there are institutional racism that need to be dealt with, but I don't think it's dealt with by just doing tokenism. Okay, we need someone of this race to put them on this side. We need someone of that religion to put them on this side. No, what we need to do is say, where is it structurally wrong? Let's take that barrier down. And I believe when you do that, you get full diversity. Just removing barriers. That's the DEI that I want to see.
Yeah, no. And I think most people would agree with you. I mean, it's interesting. I find that areas around diversity it doesn't matter whether you're liberal, whether you're conservative, whether you're like on some level, everybody wants they want to be helpful to other people. Everybody wants to create those opportunities. Just the way that they're expressed, they find that oftentimes it's a discussion about what's the means for us to achieve that. And that's where the heavy debate is. And I think, again, depending on what beliefs people have and how want to attack redistributive policies versus sort of like right-sizing some historic injustice or anything else, or just really making sure that the opportunity is there is exactly as you described, which I think is a little bit more constructive way to think about it. I do want to touch on the fact that given your background, you were, and I think, I'm not sure to what extent this played a role, but you were one of the founding members of the Parliamentary Black Caucus, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Could you talk to us a little bit about that, and how do you plan to advance diversity within Canada's corporate leadership? How do you think that happens today, and what role might investors play in an initiative like that?
Yeah, so it's kind of a little funny aside here. So Greg Fergus, who's now the Speaker of the House, was our leader. There was Greg, myself, Selena Chavez, Emmanuel Dubourg, Ahmed Hussein, a handful of us, and some, what I would say, people that were our allies that came together to form First Black Caucus. Now, I used to have a beautiful black afro. I used to be a little darker skin. That's life. You get older, whatever. So when we went up there, and a couple of colleagues go, "What's Frank doing up there?" I said, "Okay, hang on." But what we did with Black Caucus is we said, look, there's structural racism. We want to tackle that. So we had the government recognize the Decade of People of African Descent from the United Nations. We lobbied successfully to have Viola Desmond put on the $10 bill. And we also pushed very hard to have investments in Black businesses, Black entrepreneurship, so we could do our own wealth creation. And I'm telling you, I'm really happy what we did there. For example, I did my launch at Groupe 3737. It's an incubator to support Black new businesses with minimal investment compared to the big budgets of the government. They've created 7,000 jobs, 420 million in revenues. That shows me that if we invest in ourselves, we can really have an impact. Now, I'll give you, sadly, some examples where there's still racism. One of the things we were doing is inviting a lot of different Black communities to come to Ottawa. You have a right to come to Ottawa. We are opening doors, meet your ministers, meet your members of parliament, open those doors. And one of the times we had them up there, it hurts me to say this, but there was a complaint that there was a bunch of Black people in the cafeteria and what's going on and all this. And I looked to find out who made that complaint because they were going to get fired. I was so angry when I heard that, but that showed me that someone could still say today that they didn't have a right to be. I'm sad to say that they didn't have a right to be there. So that showed me right away. And obviously the person that makes that complaint, then they ran off and they didn't do it. Most of these people that are racist or whatever, they come in the middle of the night to face a building or to do something. They don't have the courage and the confidence to stand up and say who they are. But I was sorely upset that we couldn't find that person.
Before turning to the leadership race, which I do want to talk about, I do want to just touch on this. I mean, because I know you've had a charitable foundation for a long, long time. You've been very active in a number of causes, especially disadvantaged kids and providing opportunities for them. Could you talk a little bit about how some of your history has impacted that and what you've learned through that process, and how that maybe informs some of your views today?
So we started something when once the business got on its feet a little bit, I said, let's start something called for the children, FTC. And we chose to build schools and support what they call breakfast for learning here in Canada so that underprivileged kids in Canada get something to eat before they go to school. Because if you're ever given a talk and you know you're talking before people have eaten, even at adults, oh my gosh, they're just bustling. They want to eat, then they listen, not the other way around. So that was something that we supported and we have supported here in Canada. And then we also got involved with building schools in areas of underprivileged kids around the world. So one in South Africa, one in Kenya, one in India, where we were trying to help them get access to an education. And that's something that I'm really proud of. Then as it grew and as we became more successful, we've now transformed that into the Gloria Baylis Foundation, which is my mother's name in honor of my mother. And my mother cared a lot about education, access to education, and access to healthcare. So those are the two main thrusts of the foundation that's in my mother's name. And it's just about helping people domestically and abroad get access to the education they need and access to the healthcare they need. And that's in honor of my mother, who I might add is the founder of the company. So she earned that honor too.
It's great. And obviously you've perpetuated that legacy and, kudos for all that you've done, both on the business and charitable side, which actually leads me to the next question. And again, segueing into the race, right now, when we look at the poll, seemingly Mark Carney, with his extensive experience as a central banker, is now considered the forerunner for the Liberal leadership race. Now, it's interesting because he's sort of capturing the ethos, which is there is a very, very significant sensitivity to the fiscal situation in this country. And of course that, even liberals who are fiscally conscious or conservative, are sort of leaning towards Mark because of his credentials. So what, if I may say, actually it's glaringly obvious to me, but I'm just curious how you would see what differentiates you and Mark Carney, and why should investors view you as a much more viable leader for Canada's economic future?
So Mark Carney is an economist and a central banker. So these are bureaucrats that play with the interest rates to control the monetary supply, which in effect controls inflation. So they play with interest rates to try and manage inflations. That's his skill set. Mine is more in the, in the nitty gritty hard world of building businesses, being successful in taking a business from 3 people to 10 to 25, or 25 then to 100 to 250 to 500 to 1,000. And each step of the way, the needs change. So I've been through those steps. Added to that, I have experience for 48 years as a Liberal member, a volunteer, and whatever roles I played in the Liberal Party, and also 4 years of being elected. So I understand public sector world and I understand the private sector world. And I know when the public sector does the right kind of policies, they can really help the private sector. If they do the wrong kind of policies, they can really hurt the private sector. And we want to be helping them. So my skill set would be much more in industrial policies, understanding how to help businesses, and really job creation from the ground up and making the right calls. So I would be more of a hands-on, less of a theoretical person, if I could say that. And because I also have 40 years in healthcare, I've dealt with doctors, nurses, technicians, hospital administrators, policymakers, government agencies. So, and I've done it not just in Canada, in the United States, around the world. So I see what works and what doesn't work. And quite frankly, today, as you mentioned earlier in the interview, almost 50% of every provincial budget is healthcare, and it's growing. So we need a solution. This is something that I can bring again, to bring a proper healthcare policy to get us what we want and really shoot to get the best system in the world. And finally, as an engineer and someone that's done it, been a change agent in medicine, but also in other areas, I can see the great opportunity to change the way the system is run, as we talked about, both the legislature and the bureaucracy. So I see myself coming with these 3 strengths. And then it's something I've mentioned, and it's not been talked about as much. I believe in term limits, and I include that for myself. So I think that what we really want is people coming from the outside, contributing, doing what they're good at, helping the country move forward. And when they've done that, make space for other people. So I have these 3 things that I'm really focused on. And then I think if I'm able to achieve that, then I need to make space for someone else too.
Yeah, I see that. One of the critiques recently is that the Liberal Party has basically grown out of touch with economic policy. And so where would you differ meaningfully from certainly Trudeau's policies, but also Mark Carney's policies? And what are some of the, besides term limits, are there any other disruptive elements that you would introduce within the Liberal Party of Canada?
So the Liberal Party has been always a party that's swung a little to the right, a little to the left, and it's kind of been this centrist party. Today, what people would say, it's gone quite to the left. So obviously I would be more in the line of a Paul Martin liberal or Jacques Chrétien Paul Martin liberal in terms of a global picture. But it's much more than that. It's much more than that. In a philosophical sense, when you look at the world, you need wealth creation and wealth distribution. You need both. And I'm for both. But we've gone through an extended period of wealth redistribution without doing the wealth creation. So I love these new programs. I think everybody wants to have them work. I love our healthcare system. I want it to work. But to make it work, we need to create. We need to create wealth. That's what I've done. That's where my skill set is. So I want to really bring the creation of wealth forward, help the companies, help the entrepreneurs, invest in ourselves. I'm a big believer in Canadian technology, Canadian know-how. So I want to do these things intelligently and build our own wealth so that we can have these great programs. So I would differ in the sense that I'm not a theorist. I'm, like I mentioned, I'm an engineer, get my hands dirty, make the business calls that need to be made, but I'd be making them predominantly for our own technology. And I haven't even gotten into all the amazing technologies that I've seen because I mentor and help a lot of startups in the healthcare field that are going to revolutionize how healthcare is delivered. So I already see the great potential, and I see using Canadian technology to do it. That's what I call coming from the ground up. So that would be my major difference between someone like myself and a theorist like Mr. Carney, but also dealing with Mr. Trump. I've done things like I have dealt with these characters before, and I know this is not a negotiation. This is not about negotiations. I understand that intimately. So I'm going to be much more, how would I say, on the ball, much more ready to deal with a character like that and get things in order much quicker, if I could say that, because we gotta draw a line in the sand and put an end to this thing. So those are the skill sets that I bring to the table. And like anything, I believe everybody brings their skill sets. So he can talk about his skill sets, but I think mine are what the country's looking for. Mine are what the country's needing. And I think that the straight answers are also something people like from me. That's what I hear. I give a lot of these talks and people say, I kind of get what you're saying, Frank.
I totally agree. No, and I do think that that's compelling, certainly as you framed it, because I do think that we need growth, we need productivity, we need innovation desperately. I mean, we're seeing it so many and you referenced some of the startups. I can't tell you how many technology companies I've seen get started in Canada and then move to the US. Get started in Canada and get most of their funding in the US and get then ultimately the distributions and the value creation. So the risk happens here and the payout happens there. And that's it's insane, really. And I think that does need to be sort of revisited. So I think let's take for as a given that these are more compelling policies. Question is, how do you even get into the seat? I mean, right now, Mark Carney's, I guess he's leading in the fundraising race and by polls quite significantly. How do you plan to overcome that? How do you plan on sort of engaging the campaign or your support base or the broader base to be able to catch up?
So my challenge obviously is that I started as, in the terms of the political world, a relatively unknown. I'm more known in the business community, but there is what they call the Ottawa bubble, and Mark Carney and the other ministers, they live in Ottawa. They're part of the bubble. They see each other and I'm coming from the outside trying to break in. My biggest challenge is actually time, because the more I do this, I receive emails, I receive messages of encouragement, and that's really heartwarming, and I really appreciate that. And people are saying, as they get to know me, they're really moving over. They're saying, this is what we're looking for, Frank. Now, I'm in a race, and it's an extremely, extremely short race, but I'm a perpetual optimist, and I think that what's going to happen is that if Liberals take the time to really analyze who's going to step up to meet the threat of Mr. Poilievre and the threat of Mr. Trump the best, I don't even think there's and I'm not bragging on myself, but I just think that my skill sets are far more in line with what the country needs now. And I'm not a very partisan person, Mo, so I don't think that all Conservatives are the devil or all NDPers. I don't go for that at all. But I am particularly worried about Mr. Polyev because when I was there, I found him to be, how would I say, extreme partisan. And you can be partisan, you can be for your side or the other side. But if you think that all the others are the devil and you have all the answers and you have not done anything in your life except be a career politician, that's not what the country needs right now. And I'm concerned that he'll do some serious damage to the country. Much like, quite frankly, I see Mr. Trump doing serious damage to the United States reputation worldwide, serious damage to their economy. These things have a way of pricking through. So as you mentioned, we're going to start looking at diversifying ourselves away from the Americans. We're going to give ourselves options and we're going to be stronger without them. And if I can identify businesses that we can pull up to use aluminum, for example, and bring them up here, we're going to look to do things like that. So I think that this is actually a particularly important election. And I think it's one that where people are going to look for a leader that can resonate with the average person and understand their needs. So, but I'm also a realist. I know that I have a hill to climb, but that's never stopped me from throwing my hat in the ring and working hard. And that's what I'm doing.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe just before we go on, just if people wanted to support you and they resonate with these policies, they resonate with these ideas, and they want to see you actually have the best shot that you can, where could they go? How do they support you? Anything you could advise on that front?
Certainly. And thanks for that opening. So I have a website called frankbaylis.ca, YLIS1S, frankbaylis.ca. And there, what they can do is learn about my policies. They can also donate if they want. And I do need to raise funds. So this was a very large entry fee, but I also am not allowed to pay for my staff and all that. So I have to raise funds to do that. And I'm very grateful for anybody that can make a donation and also read about my policies and share my ideas because I need to build that base, as we say, and I need to get fundraising. Now, to tell you one other thing, when I traveled the country, I did not find a lot of support for Mr. Polyev. Now, maybe I'm not talking to the people that would support him, but I talk to everybody and I talk to conservatives and that. And I've always thought that if we made a change in leadership, and it's not plus or minus against Prime Minister Trudeau. It's just you run your course and that, and you've already seen the minute he left, it's like a spring reloaded itself. It popped back up. And I see the same thing, quite frankly, with Mr. Carney, is once people get the full view of it, I think they're not going to be so enamored with this mythology that's created that they're going to say, okay, we need something that's got his hands dirty in that. So with the support of people like your listeners and all that, I can really make a difference. And I think it's important that my voice be heard. It's important that I start pulling, and I'm a force to bring people back to the center, back to fiscal responsibility, back to bringing our dollar up, all these things that are needed, quite frankly, for our country to shine the way it can.
If you were pitching your leadership race to a Silicon Valley venture capitalist, and he was giving you just like a very short elevator pitch on your one-liner, whatever it is, on why Frank over anybody else, what are you tossing their way?
Okay, so I get pitched a lot just because of who I am, and I also help people pitch. I help them when they pitch a lot too. And you've heard this, probably everybody's heard it. First thing they look for is people, people, people. Another thing they say is like, great idea, bad people, no good. Average idea, great people, better. So I think that I would encourage them to say, what do you need? What skill sets are we looking for? And I would say, please take your time, because what I've noticed too is whenever someone's trying to rush you into a sale, it's not a good thing. So if they say, buy now, buy now, buy now, that's a good indicator to say, wait a minute. If someone says to you, please wait a minute and shop around, they're probably selling you something that they know if you take the time, you're going to buy. So I would be saying the same thing. Please take your time, shop around, look at my website, look at what I've done, look at what these others have done, and make your call. And Mr. Polyev is saying, I won election yesterday because I can only go down, and he is going down. And he's going now, buy now. So I would say that. I would say, I think that you're going to invest in people. That's what it is. We're all going to try and look, everybody from the NDP to the Liberals to Conservatives, we all say the same things. They would say, I want to help families. No, I want to help families. We all want to help families. Guess what? We all want to help students. Guess what? We all want to help seniors. So the question is, how do you do it? And what do you prioritize? Everybody wants better healthcare. Everybody wants a good environment. Everybody wants to create jobs. But who's got the skill set to do it? Who's done it, and who's talking about doing it in a real manner, not just airy-fairy, who's not just sloganeering. That's what I would ask the Silicon Valley elevator pitch to think about.
That's great. And just out of curiosity, if you weren't running for the leadership and you weren't going to go back to your business, is there any unexpected career path or next chapter that you would entertain?
Yeah. So when I was in high school, I did that test, whatever. And it came out that I should be one of those guys, a forest firefighter, and the kind that they parachute, the super dangerous ones that race and try and cut a line before the fire burns over that. And I have to tell you, I was like, what? And it's always been in the back of my mind that I wouldn't mind being a firefighter. Now, my wife says, don't even think about it. And obviously, it's a daydream, but there's part of me that says, yeah, you know what, maybe I'll go become a firefighter.
I think that would actually be easier than politics. I think that'd be taking the easy path. Maybe we'll close on this. Frank, you're always been, ever since I've known you, intellectually curious, humble, thoughtful, very interested in what the people around you have to say. But if you kind of look back at history, if you could have dinner with any person, Canadian, American, it doesn't matter who, and it's somebody that you could have dinner with, who would it be? And what would you want to know from them?
There's so many great men of history. I would tell two, if you'll permit me. One is less known, George Marshall. George Marshall is involved with the Marshall Plan, but he did so much more than that. He is involved in every aspect of American history for so many presidents. And Harry Truman said he's the greatest man of our generation. And I have read a lot about him, and I've seen the impact he had in fighting the Nazis, the impact he had in trying to stop Chiang Kai-shek from losing to the Communist Party in China. The work that he did trying to make sure Israel did not fall into this polarization. And sometimes he was successful, sometimes he was not. But I think that this man had such an impact on the world, and he was unsung. And part of me likes that idea of just getting work done and being unsung. So he'd be one I'd love to talk to. The other one, obviously, for me would be Nelson Mandela, because I think that Nelson Mandela look at what didn't happen after they ended apartheid. And there was not a great retribution. There was, by and large, obviously it was not perfect, but I think this man was a filter for all the anger, all the hatred, and he actually pulled it in and brought it such that there was a peaceful transition. There was a way that they found a way to live together. I have such a deep, deep respect for that man and for George Marshall. I'd love to sit down with either of them and just listen to I wouldn't say a word for 3 hours.
Yeah, no, those are great answers, and both remarkable individuals. I love the framework of an unsung hero that had a catalytic effect on the world. Certainly, Frank, I wish you nothing but luck and success in this campaign. I do hope that people appreciate the unique value proposition that you bring to the table, the entrepreneurial spirit, the balanced perspective, and that middle path that unfortunately is absent in our economic and social discourse today. And so, more than anything, I thank you so much for joining us. This was phenomenal, very insightful, and really, if there's any way that we can be helpful, please don't hesitate to reach out. And all the best. Once again, if anybody's interested, frankbaylis.ca, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
frankbaylis.ca.
If you permit me, please, Mo, I'd just like to say how deeply grateful I am for you. I'm very, and I'm going to throw, what we call sexual slastic flower, I'm going to throw you some flowers here, because I am so impressed with your energy level, so impressed with, when I read about everything that you've accomplished, the books you write, the businesses you run, I'm so impressed, and I'm very, very grateful for this opportunity to get a chance to speak to people. I really enjoy these because it's not a soundbite, and I get to explain a bit about my thinking. So I'm very, very grateful for this opportunity. I just want to say thank you very much.
Frank, first of all, it's our honor. You have a phenomenal story, and it needs to get out. And I'm hopeful that in some small way this contributes to that. So thank you again. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll talk again soon.